When the rain hit the glass of her window, her trembling hands caressed the old letter, the last memory of a love taken away. Her eyes, worn by time and tears, no longer expected anything but silence, until she appeared in the square, with a faded blue dress and an ancient promise between her lips. In her eyes he saw the reflection of a future he thought was lost, like dry earth that suddenly feels the promise of water. If this story of second chances touched your heart, give us that small but valuable gesture of your finger on the like button. It's like saying, I too believe in new beginnings. And now, how do you imagine this story will end? Will Elena and Diego find the most valuable treasure in the promised land? Share your heart in the comments. Your story is also ours. The midday sun floated high above the dusty square of the small western town, casting short, hard shadows on the weathered wooden facades. The auctioneer's hammer resonated dryly, like thunder without clouds, while sweaty men wiped their foreheads with handkerchiefs and women fanned themselves with handmade fans. Elena observed from the corner of the square, feeling how the faded blue dress stuck to her skin. Her hands, small but firm, squeezed the worn edge of the ribbon that held her brown hair. It's now or never, she thought, as her heart beat against her ribs like a caged bird. Every face in that crowd was unknown to her, except one. She had studied him for weeks through yellowed photographs and merchants' accounts. Diego Montero, the man with the worn hat and boots stained with dry mud, remained distant, almost invisible among the crowd. Elena observed him, memorizing every detail, the way he leaned slightly on his left leg, how his eyes seemed to scan the horizon even amid the people, the way his calloused hands rested on his leather belt. A knot formed in her throat when the auctioneer announced the next lot. With a deep breath that tasted of dust and fear, Elena emerged from the crowd. The murmurs ceased. Time seemed to stop under that relentless sky. I am his fiancée, she proclaimed with a clear but trembling voice, pointing directly at Diego. Please, buy me. The words floated in the heat-laden air, heavy as stones thrown into a bottomless well. Diego's eyes, the color of damp earth after the rain, met hers. There was no recognition in them, only a mixture of confusion and something Elena could not decipher. The silence that followed seemed to contain the collective breath of the entire town. Elena remained motionless, her gaze fixed on that man who did not know her, but whose life was irremediably intertwined with hers through promises made before either of them knew what it meant to promise. The small room above the general store smelled of old wood and cheap soap. Elena contemplated the cracked ceiling from the narrow bed, counting the shadows that the oil lamp projected on the walls. 3 days had passed since her dramatic appearance at the auction. 3 days of curious looks and barely disguised whispers. Mr. Mendoza, owner of the general store and now her temporary employer, had offered her accommodation and work. Until this matter is cleared up, he had said with a mixture of distrust and curiosity. Elena knew he considered her a liar, or a madwoman, perhaps both. What decent woman would claim an unknown man as her fiancé in the middle of a square? Her fingers traced the contour of the small medallion that hung from her neck, the only tangible memory of her father. Inside it kept a lock of hair and a piece of paper with a date written on it, October 12, 1870, the date when her father and Diego's father had sealed their agreement. You're not what you appear to be, are you? The blacksmith's wife had asked her that morning while buying flour. Elena had smiled without answering. How to explain that she had escaped from a forced marriage in her native village, that she had studied in secret, reading the forbidden books her mother hid under the floorboards, that she knew Diego Montero's story better than he did himself? She got up and walked to the small window. In the distance, beyond the limits of the town, she could make out the silhouette of the Montero ranch outlined against the starry sky. Diego had not approached her again since that day. She had seen him watching her from a distance, but never close enough to hear her explanation. She took a yellowed letter from her trunk, with the handwriting faded by time. The words were still clear despite the years. Our children will seal with their union what we began together. Promises of men who were no longer there, leaving their children tied to foreign dreams. Elena closed her eyes, letting the tears she had held back for weeks finally roll down her cheeks. She had risked everything for this opportunity, for this man who didn't even know who she was. For a moment, she allowed herself to doubt. What if she had made a mistake? What if her father's Memories were just the fantasies of a dying man. Outside, the desert wind blew, moving the sand as if they were the hands of an invisible clock, counting a time that seemed suspended between the past and a future that Eleanor could not imagine. The general store was a microcosm of the entire town. Everyone passed through its doors, from the mayor with his impeccable suit to the last-day laborer covered in dust. Eleanor learned to observe, to listen to conversations that abruptly stopped when she approached, to interpret the looks. That morning, while arranging cans of preserves on the shelves, she felt his presence before seeing him. Diego Montero entered with the sunlight at his back, casting an elongated shadow on the wooden floor. He wasn't wearing his hat, and Elena noticed a fine scar that crossed his left eyebrow, a detail that the photographs hadn't captured. "Good morning," she greeted naturally, as if her heart wasn't accelerating. "Can I help you with something?" Diego looked at her directly without blinking. His eyes seemed to study every detail of her face, as if looking for something specific. "Salt, flour, coffee," he said in a grave, laconic voice. "And an explanation." Elena felt the air become denser. With deliberately slow movements, she began to gather the requested items. Her fingers, normally agile, seemed clumsy under that gaze. "The explanation will take longer than getting these products," she finally replied, placing the last package on the counter. Diego nodded slightly. A silent understanding passed between them. When Mr. Mendoza appeared from the back store, the conversation vanished, replaced by the metallic sound of coins on wood. "My father used to say that promises are like seeds," Diego commented before leaving. "Some germinate, others rot in the ground." Elena watched his back as he walked away, feeling the weight of those words. That afternoon, while sweeping the store's porch, she saw a boy approach timidly. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and ran away before she could thank him. Inside, she found a worn book of poems and a brief note. "Tomorrow at dawn, by the stream." That night, Elena didn't sleep. She spent hours reading those poems by the flickering light of the lamp, stopping at the pages where some lines were underlined with faded ink. "It is not time who decides which seeds flourish, but the earth that welcomes them." At dawn, with the book pressed against her chest, Elena walked to the stream, where Diego's solitary silhouette was already waiting for her. They did not exchange greetings. The silence between them was like a third character, alive and pulsating. "My father died mentioning a debt of honor," Diego finally said, looking at the water running between the stones. "I never knew what it was." Elena extracted the letter from her pocket and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the morning breeze. "This is the promise that binds us," she murmured, "written by your father and mine 15 years ago." The suffocating heat of July seemed to melt even the shadows. Eleanor observed the world from behind the store counter, where Mr. Mendoza had allowed her to set up a small desk. Her skills with numbers and letters had proven valuable, though they still provoked looks of distrust among some customers. "A woman who knows more than reading the Bible is dangerous," the mayor's wife had commented to another lady, loud enough for Elena to hear. It wasn't the first time she had faced that kind of prejudice. In her native village, her knowledge had been seen as a threat. One more reason to hasten her marriage to the son of the local landowner, a marriage from which she had fled, leaving behind everything she knew. Diego had begun to visit her regularly, always with some excuse to enter the store. Their conversations, initially tense and formal, had gradually changed. Elena discovered that he was a man of few words but deep thoughts. He had told her about his ranch, about how he struggled to keep it afloat after his father's death. What Diego didn't know, what Elena still didn't dare to reveal, was the real reason why she had traveled to this lost town. It wasn't just the promise of marriage that had brought her, but a darker secret buried under layers of silence and fear. That afternoon, while closing the store, she saw an elegant man watching her from across the street. He wore an impeccable suite despite the heat, and his eyes had the cold shine of someone accustomed to calculating the value of everything he saw. "Miss Eleanor," he greeted her, approaching with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Javier Quintero, owner of the saloon and the hotel." Elena felt a chill. She had heard about him. Gambler, moneylender, businessman with a reputation for always getting what he wanted. "A pleasure, Mr. Quintero," she responded cautiously, closing. The store door. "I've heard fascinating stories about you," he continued, studying her with interest. "The mysterious woman who claims ancient promises. It's intriguing. Ancient promises are the business of those who made them and those who must fulfill them," Elena replied, holding his gaze. Quintero laughed softly. "Did you know that the Montero Ranch legally belongs to me?" he asked in a casual tone. "Old Montero lost it in a poker game. Diego only works the land that is no longer his." The world seemed to stop. Elena felt the ground moving beneath her feet as the pieces fit together in her mind. Her father had spoken of a betrayal, of lands taken through deception. "You're lying," she whispered, although deep inside she knew it wasn't so. "Deeds don't lie, dear," Quintero replied. "And I wonder, what value would your marriage promise have if there's no ranch to inherit?" He left her motionless on the sidewalk, with her heart beating painfully in her chest. That night, while the moon illuminated her small room, Elena took from the hem of her blue dress a small, carefully folded map. She spread it on the bed, tracing with her fingers the lines her father had drawn years ago. "The true wealth," her father had said on his deathbed, "was never in the gold we sought, but in the land itself." Now she understood why Quintero wanted those lands, why Diego's father had lost them in such suspicious circumstances, and why she had to find the courage to reveal the whole truth to Diego, even if it meant losing him forever. The first storm of August came with unleashed fury, transforming the dusty streets into rivers of mud. Elena contemplated the rain from the store's porch, feeling how each drop seemed to wash something inside her, as if the sky itself was cleaning her soul of doubts. "You shouldn't be out here," said a familiar voice behind her. Diego was at the door, soaked, with his hat dripping, and a look Elena hadn't seen before. "I've been investigating," he continued, approaching. "About your father, about mine." Elena felt her heart stop. "And what have you discovered?" she asked, fearing the answer. "That my father would never have lost the ranch playing cards," Diego replied, with a certainty that made Elena hold her breath. "He didn't drink. He didn't gamble. Something else happened that night." Lightning illuminated the sky, followed by the rumble of thunder. Elena thought about the hidden map, about the implications of what she knew. The moment of truth had arrived. "I need to show you something," she finally said, "but not here." The stable behind the store offered a refuge from the downpour. In the trembling light of a lamp, Elena took the map from its hiding place and spread it on a bale of hay. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold of her wet clothes, but from the fear of what would come after. "My father and yours were not just partners in the ranch," she explained, while Diego studied the yellowed paper. "They were looking for something more valuable." Diego ran his fingers over the marks on the map, recognizing the contours of his own land. "Gold," he murmured, finally understanding. "On the ranch property," Elena confirmed. "My father was convinced there was a vein, but they never managed to find it. After his disappearance, your father continued searching alone." A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the sound of rain hitting the stable roof and the occasional whinnying of horses. "Why? Didn't you tell me before?" Diego's voice sounded distant, as if coming from far away. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of all the half-truths, of all the secrets kept. "Because I first needed to know what kind of man you are," she replied honestly. "If you were like your father, a man of honor, or if time had changed you." Diego looked at her then, really looked at her, as if for the first time he saw beyond the woman who had appeared claiming a promise. "And what have you decided?" asked in a hoarse voice. "That you are a man who values truth more than gold," Elena replied, holding his gaze, "and that you deserve to know the whole story, even if afterward you decide you want nothing to do with me." Outside, the storm intensified, but inside the stable, amid the smell of damp hay and horses, something began to change between them. It wasn't yet full trust, but it resembled it. It was the beginning of something that neither of them dared to name. The news spread through the town like wildfire in dry grass. Javier Quintero had hired men to fence what remained of the Montero ranch. Diego, furious but contained, had confronted the gambler in the middle of the street, demanding explanations. "The deeds say it's mine," Quintero had replied with a smile that made Elena's blood boil with indignation when they told her. "You can continue working the land as my employee." From her place behind the store counter, Elena observed how alliances formed and dissolved in the town. Some supported Diego, a son of the place, born and raised on those lands, Others, fearful of Quintero's economic power, looked the other way. Elena was no longer the foreigner whom everyone distrusted. Her dedication in the store, her kind treatment, and her discretion had earned her the respect of many. Women had begun to consult her on matters that required knowing how to read and write. Children brought her small gifts, a wildflower, a stone of curious shape, a poorly made drawing, but full of affection. That afternoon, while closing the store, she saw the widow Ramirez approaching, an older woman whose face, weathered by the sun, reflected the harshness of a life in those lands. "They say you are Diego Montero's fiancé," she said without preamble. "It's complicated," Elena replied, not knowing how to explain what she herself didn't completely understand. The old woman studied her with eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "My husband worked for the Monteros for 30 years, the widow continued. "He was with Diego's father the night he supposedly lost the ranch." Elena felt her heart accelerate. "And what really happened?" she asked, almost breathless. "Quintero put something in his drink." The old woman's voice was barely a whisper. "Ricardo Montero would never have bet his land, never. But that night he signed papers he didn't remember the next day. When he tried to claim, he appeared dead. An accident, they said." The world seemed to stop around Elena. The pieces of the puzzle finally fit, forming a dark and painful image. "Does Diego know?" she asked. "The boy was 15 when it happened," the widow replied. "He knows something wasn't right, but he doesn't know the whole truth." No one dared to speak, out of fear. Elena thanked the old woman and closed the store, feeling the weight of this new information. Walking to her room, she saw Quintero watching her from the saloon's porch. His gaze had something predatory that sent a chill down her spine. That night, while embroidering by lamplight, she heard a noise at her window. Upon opening it, she found Diego, with a tense face and eyes bright with determination. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "I've discovered something about your father." Elena let him in, aware of the impropriety of the situation, but more concerned about what Diego had to say. "Your father didn't disappear in the mountains," Diego said without preamble. "According to the previous sheriff's record, he was last seen leaving Quintero's saloon, the same night my father lost the ranch." Elena felt her knees give way. She sat on the bed, trying to assimilate the information. "I think Quintero deceived them both," Diego continued, sitting beside her. "And I think he did it because of what's on that land." In the dim light of the room, their hands found each other, intertwining as if seeking strength in one another. It wasn't a romantic gesture, but one of alliance, of shared understanding. "We have to recover what is ours," Elena murmured. "For your father, for mine." Diego nodded, and in his eyes Elena saw a reflection of her own determination. They were no longer two strangers united by an ancient promise, but two people with a common purpose, a shared enemy and perhaps a future to build. September brought with it a suffocating heat that seemed to crush the town under its invisible weight. Elena had begun to embroider handkerchiefs in her scarce free moments, a skill learned from her mother that now served her to calm her restless mind. On each handkerchief, discreetly hidden among the floral designs, she embroidered the initials E and D, like a secret shared only with herself. The relationship with Diego had subtly changed since that night in her room. They were no longer chance encounters in the store or hurried conversations in corners of the town. Now they shared long walks at sunset, talking about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Diego had shown her his small cabin on the limits of the ranch, where he had lived since Quintero claimed the main house. "It's smaller than a decent stable," he had apologized, "but it's mine." Elena had looked with tenderness at those wooden walls, the few carefully maintained pieces of furniture, the worn books on an improvised shelf. Each object spoke of the man Diego was, simple, honest, resilient like the earth itself. That afternoon, while Elena organized the newly arrived merchandise, the bell at the door announced the entry of a stranger. Tall, well-dressed, with a perfectly trimmed mustache and eyes that reminded her of a hawk's. "Miss Elena Rojas, I presume," he said, with a voice that felt disturbingly familiar to her. Elena felt the blood leave her face. She knew that voice, though she had never seen its owner. "I am Rodrigo Vega," the man continued. "Your fiancé. I've come to take you back home." The world seemed to stop. Elena clung to the counter, feeling that her legs could give way at any moment. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally managed to say. You must be confusing me with someone else. Vega smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. Your father signed our engagement before dying, he said, approaching the counter. It is a debt of honor that must be fulfilled. Your escape has caused great shame to my family. Eleanor then remembered the fear she had felt upon discovering her mother's plans, to marry her to the son of the most powerful and cruel man in her native region. A marriage that would turn her into little more than a prisoner in a golden cage. My father is dead, she replied with a firmness she didn't feel, and I didn't sign any engagement. Vega hit the counter with his fist, making Elena instinctively step back. I will not leave without you, he declared with a controlled but threatening voice. I have means to force you, if necessary. The door opened again, and Diego entered, stopping as he felt the tension in the air. His eyes traveled from Elena to Vega, assessing the situation. Everything all right? He asked, approaching the counter. Perfectly, Vega replied, regaining his composure. I was just greeting my fiancée. Diego looked at Elena, who imperceptibly shook her head. Miss Rojas is engaged to me, said Diego with a calmness that contradicted the tension in his shoulders. By agreement of our fathers. Vega looked at them both, and a cruel smile formed on his lips. Interesting, he murmured. 2 promises, 1 honor to fulfill. I wonder what the judge would say about this. He left the store, leaving behind a silence as heavy as lead. Eleanor felt the tears she had been holding back beginning to run down her cheeks. Diego approached, hesitating a moment before taking her hand. I won't let him take you, he promised with a firm voice. Not if you don't want to go. Eleanor looked at him through her tears, seeing in his eyes something she had never seen before. Not just determination, but something deeper, more personal. Diego, she began, but the words got stuck in her throat. Don't say anything now, he responded, gently squeezing her hand. We'll talk tonight, on our hill. That night, under a sky studded with stars, Eleanor waited, sitting on a rock on the small hill from where the entire valley could be seen. She carried with her one of the handkerchiefs she had embroidered, a gift she didn't know if she would have the courage to give. Diego arrived when the moon was already high, bringing with him a small desert flower, one of those rare plants that only bloom after the most intense rains. They say these flowers can sleep for years under the ground, waiting for the right moment to bloom, he said, offering it to her. It reminds me of you. Eleanor took the flower, feeling something breaking and reconstructing inside her chest. I brought you this, she said, handing him the embroidered handkerchief. Diego examined it in the moonlight, discovering the intertwined initials. His smile then was like a miniature sunrise. Elena, he said her name as if it were a prayer. I don't know if this promise between our fathers was real or not, but I know I want to make you a promise of my own, one that is born from my heart, not from old papers. He took her hands in his, rough from hard work but infinitely gentle. I promise to protect you, respect you, and fight for you, not as an obligation, but as a choice, my choice. In that moment, under the vast starry sky, Elena felt that she had finally found her home, not in a place but in a person. Judge Henderson's office smelled of rancid tobacco and old paper. Elena sat upright in the uncomfortable wooden chair, aware of the look she received. Beside her, Diego maintained an apparent calm, though she could feel the tension in his body. In front of them, Rodrigo Vega smiled with confidence, while Javier Quintero remained standing by the window, apparently disinterested, but observing everything with calculating eyes. The judge, an older man with thick white eyebrows and a tired look, examined the documents spread across his desk. The letter Eleanor had brought, signed by both their fathers, the contract Vega presented, with the supposed signature of her father, the deeds of the Montero ranch now in Quintero's possession. This situation is unusual, the judge finally said, removing his glasses to clean them with a handkerchief. We have 2 apparently valid matrimonial commitments and a land dispute that complicates the whole matter. My document has priority, Vega intervened with arrogance. It is more recent and was signed by the lady's father when he was in full use of his faculties. A document that she never saw nor accepted, Diego countered. Our engagement, on the other hand, was agreed upon by both families and accepted by both parties. Elena observed the scene as if she were outside her own body. How had they come to this? To have her future decided in a dusty office among men who spoke of her as if she were cattle at auction. "If you allow me, Your Honor," she finally said, with a clear voice that surprised everyone, "I would like to speak." The judge looked at her with some surprise, but nodded. "My father died 6 months ago," Elena began, carefully choosing her words. "On his deathbed he gave me this letter and told me about the agreement with the Montero family, an agreement that he considered sacred." She took from her pocket the medallion she always carried with her and opened it, showing the lock of hair and the written date. "This is the date when my father and Diego sealed their promise," she continued. "An agreement between partners, between friends, not a commercial contract." Vega audibly scoffed, but Elena continued without being intimidated. "Mr. Vega claims to have a document signed by my father, a document that I never saw, that was never consulted with me, and that contradicts the express will that my father personally communicated to me." The judge observed Elena with growing interest, impressed by her eloquence. "As for the Montero ranch," Elena continued, looking directly at Quintero, "there are testimonies that the agreement was obtained through deception, with Mr. Montero in an altered state of consciousness." "That's defamation!" exclaimed Quintero, abandoning his pose of indifference. "We have witnesses willing to testify," Diego intervened. "Widow Ramirez was present that night, and she's not the only one." The judge hit his desk with a small gavel, requesting order. "This is no longer a simple matter of matrimonial commitments," he declared. "If there are accusations of fraud, we must investigate properly. Meanwhile, none of the parties will take actions regarding Miss Rojas or the Montero ranch." When they left the office, the midday sun struck with force. Elena felt a knot in her stomach. They had gained time, but nothing more. Vega watched them from a distance, with an expression that promised trouble. "I won't let him take you," Diego murmured, as if reading her thoughts. "Nor will Quintero keep what is ours." Elena looked at him, surprised by the use of ours. It was the first time Diego had included her rights in the equation, recognizing that she also had a part in that land. "Together we are stronger," she replied, briefly squeezing his hand. "They know it. That's why they try to separate us." That afternoon, as Elena returned to the store, a boy approached running and handed her a note. The handwriting was from Widow Ramirez. "Come to my house tonight. There is something you must see." When the sun hid behind the mountains, Elena headed to the small cabin on the outskirts of town. The widow waited for her on the porch, with a grave expression on her wrinkled face. "I feared this day," said the old woman, guiding her inside, "but I can no longer remain silent." From an old trunk, she took out a package wrapped in cloth. Upon unwrapping it, Elena saw a diary, with yellowed pages and faded ink. "Ricardo Montero's diary," explained the widow. "He gave it to me the night before he died, fearing something might happen to him." Elena opened it with trembling hands, turning the pages until she reached the last entries. "Quintero knows our secret," she read. "He knows about the map, about the vein. He has tried to buy it, but I refuse to sell my son's land. I fear what he might do." The last entry, dated the day of his death, was even more disturbing. "Rojas has disappeared. I fear the worst. Quintero has invited me to play tonight. I will go, but I have taken precautions. If something happens to me, everything I have is for Diego, and the promise with Rojas must be kept. His daughter Elena and my Diego will unite what we began." Elena closed the diary, feeling a chill. Now they had evidence, but they also had an enemy more dangerous than they had imagined. "This could change everything," she murmured. "Or it could put you in more danger," the widow replied. "Be careful, child. Men like Quintero don't play fair." With the diary carefully hidden among her clothes, Elena returned to town, feeling that every shadow hid a danger. The words written by Diego's father resonated in her mind, confirming what her heart already knew. They were destined to be together, not by obligation, but to correct an injustice, to heal a wound that had affected both families. The first week of October brought with it a change in the air, a promise of cold that had not yet materialized, but could be sensed in the mornings. Elena had also noticed changes in the town, hostile looks from those who aligned with Quintero, gestures of silent support from others. Diego's father's diary had become their most powerful weapon and their greatest danger. They kept it in different places each night, fearing that Quintero might suspect its existence. That morning, while Elena swept the store's porch, she saw Rodrigo Vega conversing animatedly with Quintero in front of the saloon. The alliance they feared had formed. Their two enemies now worked together. Don't worry so much, Mr. Mendoza told her, who had come out to hang a sign. You have more friends than you think. Elena looked at him surprised. The shopkeeper had been kind but distant since her arrival. The people of this town can be distrustful of outsiders, Mendoza continued, but we know how to recognize good people, and you and Diego are among the good ones. His words gave Elena unexpected comfort. Perhaps they weren't as alone as they thought. That afternoon, while organizing the back store, she heard the bell at the door. Upon coming out, she found a young woman she hadn't seen before. She would be her age, perhaps a bit less, with dark hair collected in a braid and eyes that showed a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Can I help you?" asked Elena. "My name is Lucia," the young woman replied, looking towards the door as if fearing someone might enter. "I worked for Mr. Quintero in the saloon." Elena then noticed the marks on her wrists as if she had been tied up. "Are you okay?" she asked, concerned. "I escaped last night," Lucia confessed. "I heard things you should know." With nervous movements, Lucia told her how Quintero and Vega planned to ambush Diego that night, to lure him with false information about the map. "They want the map, and they want you to go with Mr. Vega," Lucia explained. "They say that way everything will be resolved." Elena felt fear tightening her throat. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "They could hurt you." Lucia lowered her gaze. "Mr. Montero helped me once," she said quietly. When he wanted me to," she interrupted herself, unable to continue. "Diego defended me, said I was just a child. He saved me." Elena felt a wave of affection towards Diego, always protecting the weak, always doing the right thing without seeking recognition. "Thank you, Lucia," she said, taking the young woman's hands. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" Lucia shook her head. "Widow Ramirez will receive you," Elena decided. "You'll be safe there while we resolve this." After making sure Lucia arrived safely at the widow's house, Elena headed to Diego's cabin. She had to warn him they had to prepare. She found him repairing a fence, with his torso bare under the afternoon sun. Elena stopped for a moment, observing him. The tense muscles under the bronzed skin, the dark hair, stuck to his forehead with sweat, the absolute concentration on his task. She felt a heat that had nothing to do with the October sun. It was a heat that was born inside her, that spread through her body like a silent fire. She had fallen in love with Diego, not because of the promise, not because of duty, but because of the man he was. "Elena?" he said upon seeing her, surprised and somewhat embarrassed by his state. "I wasn't expecting you." "They're coming for you tonight," she replied, without preamble. "Quintero and Vega, it's a trap." Diego dropped the hammer and approached her, forgetting his partial nakedness. "How do you know?" Elena told him about Lucia, about the plan she had heard. While she spoke, she saw how Diego's expression hardened. "This has to end," he finally said. "We can't keep waiting, hiding." He took his shirt and put it on, but not before Elena noticed a scar on his shoulder, long and pale against his brown skin. "What do you propose?" she asked. "The diary, the map, the testimonies. It's time to present everything to the judge," Diego replied. "But first we have to find the gold." Elena looked at him, surprised. "The gold? Now? If we can prove it exists, that it's where your father said, we'll have more strength," Diego explained. "And I know every inch of that land. If there's gold there, we'll find it." That night, under the light of a waning moon, Elena and Diego entered the most remote part of the ranch. The map marked a cave at the base of a small hill, a cave that Diego had known since childhood. "I played here as a child," he explained as he lit a lamp, "but I never went too deep. My father forbade it. The entrance was narrow, just enough for them to pass through crouching. The air inside was cold and humid, with a smell of earth and minerals that filled the lungs. According to the map, we should follow this tunnel to a fork," Elena indicated, holding the yellowed paper close to the light. They advanced in silence, only the sound of their breathing and their steps resonating on the rock walls. Elena felt her heart beating in her throat. They were so close to discovering the truth, so close to having evidence that no one could deny. When they reached the fork, Diego raised the lamp to illuminate both paths. "The map says we should go to the right," Elena murmured. The tunnel narrowed even more, forcing them to advance almost on all fours in some sections. Elena could feel the weight of the mountain above them, the pressure of time, the urgency to find something that confirmed their father's suspicions. Finally, the tunnel led to a small chamber. Diego raised the lamp, illuminating the walls, and then they saw it. Golden veins reflecting the light, embedded in the black rock like veins in a giant body. Gold. Pure. Abundant. Unquestionable. They were right, Diego whispered with a reverent voice. All this time, they were right. Elena approached the wall, passing her fingers over the precious metal that had cost her parents' lives, that had unleashed so much greed and pain. This changes everything, she said, feeling a mixture of vindication and sadness. Now we can prove what Quintero would do anything to hide. As they returned through the narrow tunnel, a noise alerted them. They were not alone. Someone else had entered the cave. Diego immediately turned off the lamp, plunging them into absolute darkness. "Don't make noise," he whispered in Elena's ear. "Follow me." In the darkness, their hands found each other. Elena could feel Diego's accelerated pulse, the tension in his fingers. They advanced by feeling their way, guided only by instinct and Diego's knowledge of the cave. Behind them, the voices of several men resonated, approaching. Quintero had sent his thugs, probably after not finding Diego in his cabin. "There's another exit," Diego murmured so low that Elena could barely hear him. "My father showed it to me once, in case I got lost." They changed direction, taking a lateral passage so narrow that they had to slide sideways. Elena felt the rock scraping her back, the air increasingly scarce, the fear growing in her chest. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they felt a fresh breeze. The exit was near. They emerged through a crack between rocks on a different side of the hill, covered by thorny bushes. They dropped to the ground, breathing heavily. In the distance, they could see the lights of lanterns moving inside the main cave. "They found it," Elena said with desperation. "They found the gold." Diego took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "It doesn't matter," he said firmly. "We have the map, the diary, the testimonies, and now we know with certainty that the gold exists. It's enough." In the dimness of that night, their faces were so close that Elena could feel Diego's breath mixing with hers. Without thinking, without hesitating, she closed the distance between them, kissing him with an urgency born of fear and hope. Diego responded with equal intensity, embracing her as if he feared she might vanish. When they finally separated, both knew that something fundamental had changed between them. They were no longer two people united by an ancient promise, but two hearts that had chosen the same path. "Let's go home," said Diego, helping her to stand up. "Tomorrow we'll face whatever comes." The morning dawned grey and cold, with a cutting wind that presaged a storm. Elena dressed carefully, choosing her most sober dress, combing her hair in an austere bun. Today they would face the judge, Quintero Vega. Today, everything would be decided. Diego was waiting for her in front of the store, mounted on his horse and holding the reins of a mare for her. He too had taken care with his appearance. Clean shirt, vest, hair combed back, beard trimmed. "You look beautiful," he said upon seeing her, with a simplicity that made Elena's heart skip a beat. They rode together to the courthouse where a small crowd had already gathered. News traveled fast in town, and everyone knew that today the conflict that had divided the community would be resolved. In the judge's office, Quintero and Vega were already waiting, both with confident expressions. Elena noticed that Quintero had a scratch on his cheek, probably obtained in the cave the night before. "I see everyone is here," said Judge Henderson, adjusting his glasses. "Good. Let's proceed. Miss Rojas, Mr. Montero, I understand you have new evidence to present." Diego placed his father's diary on the desk, open to the last pages. "The personal diary of Ricardo Montero, my father," he explained. In it, he details how he feared for his life, how he suspected Quintero would try to deceive him to obtain his land. The judge took the diary, reading attentively, while his eyebrows rose in surprise. "This is disturbing," he murmured. "And do you have testimonies that corroborate this?" "Widow Ramirez is waiting." "Outside," Elena confirmed. "She witnessed how Quintero drugged Mr. Montero the night he supposedly lost the ranch gambling." Quintero stood up, hitting the desk with fury. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed. "A diary can say anything. They are the words of a dead man against signed legal documents." "Documents obtained through deception," Diego countered. "And there's more." Elena then took the map from her purse. This map, drawn by my father, shows the location of a gold vein on the Montero ranch, she explained. Last night we confirmed its existence. The gold is real and it's exactly where the map indicates. Silence fell over the room. The judge looked alternately at the map, the diary, and the tense faces in front of him. Are you saying that Mr. Quintero committed fraud to obtain those lands, knowing about the gold? He finally asked. And possibly something worse, Elena added with a firm voice. My father disappeared the same night that Diego's father lost his ranch. Both knew the secret of the gold. Quintero's face turned pale, then red with anger. I will not allow you to defame me like this, he shouted. I have rights to that land. I have the documents. Documents that we will review thoroughly, the judge responded severely, along with this new evidence. Vega, who had remained surprisingly silent, then stood up. All this is very interesting, he said with a controlled voice, but it doesn't affect my claim over Miss Rojas. Her father signed our engagement. It's a separate matter. Elena felt her blood freeze in her veins. Amid the battle for the ranch and the gold, she had almost forgotten that her own freedom was at stake. About that, a voice intervened from the door. Everyone turned to see Widow Ramirez, who entered leaning on her cane, holding a small package. The day Carlos Rojas came to this town for the last time, he gave me this, she said, unwrapping a yellow document. He asked me to keep it, fearing something might happen to him. She handed the paper to the judge, who read it with increasing amazement. It's a formal revocation of any matrimonial commitment he might have signed under coercion, the judge explained. Signed and dated 3 days before his disappearance. Vega turned pale, looking at the document as if it were a venomous snake. That can't be legal, he protested weakly. Oh, it's perfectly legal, the judge replied, and it's backed by witnesses. The old magistrate removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly as he considered all the information. Given the circumstances, he finally said, I order that the deeds of the Montero Ranch be suspended until a thorough investigation is completed. And as for Mr. Vega's supposed engagement to Miss Rojas, I declare it null and void. Elena felt an enormous weight lifting from her shoulders. Beside her, Diego discreetly took her hand, squeezing it in a gesture of support and silent celebration. Quintero and Vega left the office furious, launching barely veiled threats, but Elena and Diego barely heard them. They had won the first battle, the most important one. That afternoon, as the sun set behind the mountains, tinting the sky orange and pink, Elena and Diego sat on the porch of the small cabin. What will we do now? She asked, resting her head on Diego's shoulder. Rebuild, he replied, putting an arm around her shoulders. The ranch, our lives, everything. Elena closed her eyes, savoring the word, our. For the first time, since she had arrived in that town, she felt she truly belonged somewhere to someone. And us? She asked quietly. What about our father's promise? Diego looked at her, with an intensity that made Elena hold her breath. I don't care about the promise, he said in a hoarse voice. I care about you. I want you by my side, not because our fathers decided it, but because I have chosen it. Because I love you. The words, so simple and so profound, floated between them like a prayer. Elena felt tears filling her eyes, but they were different from all the tears she had shed before. They were tears of joy, of belonging, of future. I love you too, she replied, and the words sounded like a promise more powerful than any contract, more lasting than any written agreement. In the distance, the first thunders announced the approaching storm, but for the first time, Elena did not fear what would come. They were together, and together they would face any tempest. The storm that had been announced for days finally unleashed its fury on the town. The streets turned into rivers of mud, the roofs creaked under the lashing of the wind, and lightning illuminated the night sky as if it were broad daylight. Elena observed the rain from the window of her room, listening to the incessant tapping against the glass. News traveled fast. Quintero had left town during the night, taking with him what he could save from his businesses. Vega, publicly humiliated, had also disappeared. They should feel relieved, Elena thought. The immediate dangers had moved away. However, a persistent uneasiness remained in her heart, as if something else needed to be resolved before being able to feel true peace. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Upon opening it, she found Mr. Mendoza, soaked and with a worried expression. "The stream has overflowed," he said without preamble. "The water is reaching the lower houses. Diego is organizing the evacuation and asked me to let you know." Elena needed no further explanations. She put a shawl over her shoulders, took a bag with bandages and medicines that she always kept prepared, and followed the shopkeeper under the torrential rain. The scene in the lower part of town was chaotic. The brown water advanced inexorably, dragging logs, furniture, and small animals. People struggled to save their belongings, carrying children and the elderly to higher ground. In the midst of it all, Elena saw Diego, soaked to the bone, helping a family to get out an elderly, bedridden woman. His face reflected determination and urgency, but not panic. He was a man accustomed to crises, to facing the fury of nature. Elena joined the efforts, attending to those who suffered injuries or showed signs of hypothermia. Her hands worked with precision, while her mind remained strangely calm. This was her place now, beside these people, beside Diego. At midnight, when the rain finally subsided, the evacuees were settling in the church, the town, hall and houses that had offered refuge. Elena, exhausted but satisfied, helped distribute blankets and hot food. "You're amazing," said a voice behind her. Diego was there, with his clothes still damp clinging to his body, his hair disheveled, and an expression of admiration in his tired eyes. "I'm just doing what I can," she replied, feeling an inexplicable blush on her cheeks. "Like everyone else." "Not like everyone else," he contradicted, approaching. "I've been watching you all night. You don't just help, but you console, you give hope." Elena lowered her gaze, not accustomed to receiving such direct praise. "My mother was a healer in our village," she explained. "She taught me that healing is not just curing the body." Diego nodded, as if that information completed a puzzle in his mind. "Come," he said, taking her hand. "You need to rest a bit." He guided her to a quiet corner of the church, where he had improvised a small space with blankets. He offered her a cup of hot coffee that someone had prepared on an improvised stove. "Do you remember the first time we talked?" Diego asked, sitting beside her. "In the store, when you pretended not to know me." Elena smiled at the memory. "I knew so much about you, and you had no idea who I was," she replied. "It must have been strange." "Disturbing," Diego admitted, "but also fascinating. There was something in your eyes, something that told me I could trust you, even though all my common sense warned me otherwise." They remained silent for a moment, listening to the rain that intensified again outside and the breathing of the evacuees sleeping around them. "What will you do now?" Diego finally asked. "With the ranch, with us?" Elena looked at her hands, stained with mud and small cuts from the night of work. "My father and yours dreamed of uniting their lives, their lands, their families," she replied slowly. "For a long time I thought I was here to fulfill that promise. But now, Diego encouraged her when she stopped. "Now I understand that I am here for myself," Elena continued, raising her gaze to meet his. "Because I want to be here, with you, with these people, in this land." Diego took her hands in his, rough but infinitely gentle. "When all this is over," he said in a grave voice, "when the ranch is legally ours and the waters have receded, would you marry me? Not because of our father's promise, but because of ours." Elena felt time stop, the voices around her, the sound of the rain. Everything seemed to vanish. Only Diego's eyes existed, his question and the absolute certainty in her heart. "Yes," she simply replied, "for our promise." Diego then leaned in, kissing her softly. A kiss of promise, of future, of certainty. When they separated, both were smiling. "You should rest," he said, caressing her cheek. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Elena nodded, suddenly feeling all the weight of exhaustion. She lay down on the improvised blankets, and the last thing she saw before closing her eyes was Diego's face, watching over her sleep like a silent guardian. That night she dreamed of the land turning green again after the storm, of new beginnings and fulfilled promises, not by obligation, but by choice. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. The town slowly recovered from the flood, rebuilding what was lost, strengthening what had resisted. Elena and Diego worked side by side with others, helping where needed, offering consolation and hope. The investigation about the ranch was progressing favorably. With Quintero disappeared and evidence accumulating against him, Judge Henderson had preliminarily declared that the deeds would return to Diego's name. The existence of gold had been officially confirmed, although Diego insisted it remain secret for the moment. "I don't want this land to become a battlefield for greed," he had explained. "The gold will be there when we decide what to do with it." One November morning, while the sun shone with that golden and soft light characteristic of late autumn, Elena and Diego rode to the ranch. The main house, abandoned for so long, welcomed them with broken windows and squeaking doors. "It was beautiful in its time," Diego said as they dismounted. "My mother had flowers everywhere." Elena observed the two-story structure, imagining how it would have been in its days of glory. Beneath the layer of dust and abandonment, she could see the solidity, the underlying beauty. "It could be. Again," she suggested, taking Diego's hand. "With time, work, and love." They entered together, their steps resonating on the wooden floor. Room after room, Diego showed her spaces full of memories. The room where his mother played the piano, the study where his father reviewed his accounts, the kitchen where it always smelled of freshly baked bread. On the upper floor, they stopped in front of a closed door. "My room," Diego said with a nostalgic voice. "I haven't entered since... Everything changed." Elena squeezed his hand, offering silent support. With a sigh, Diego opened the door. The room was practically intact, as if time had stopped. A simple bed, shelves with books and small childhood treasures, a collection of interesting rocks, a horse carved in wood, an antique spyglass. "I was happy here," Diego murmured, touching the objects with reverence. "I never thought I would lose everything." "You didn't lose everything," Elena replied softly. "You kept the most important thing, your integrity, your strength, your capacity to love." Diego looked at her then, with an expression that mixed old pain and new hope. "You're right," he finally said. "And now I have something I never had. Someone who understands me completely." They returned to the lower floor, to the spacious kitchen where the sun's rays entered through dirty windows, creating patterns of light on the dusty floor. "Here," said Diego, pointing to the solid wooden table that dominated the center of the room. "Here is where I want to begin our new life." From his pocket, he took out a small package wrapped in cloth. Upon unwrapping it, Elena saw two simple rings, one larger than the other, made with the same golden metal. "I made them myself," Diego explained, suddenly shy. "With a small sample of gold from our land. They're not perfect, but they are perfect precisely because they aren't," Elena interrupted, with tears in her eyes. "Like us." Diego took the smaller ring and slid it onto Elena's finger. She did the same with the other. They didn't pronounce formal vows. There were no witnesses except the silent walls and the sun that bathed them with its light. It was a private promise, more powerful than any ceremony. "They say a marriage isn't just the union of two people," Elena murmured, looking at the ring on her finger, "but of two stories, two pasts, two futures. And two families," Diego added. "Our fathers would have been proud, I think, not for fulfilling their agreement, but for finding our own path to the same destination." They left the house hand in hand, towards the open space behind the structure. There, where before there was only arid and neglected land, Diego stopped. "Here," he said, pointing to a wide area. "Here we'll plant our garden. Tomatoes, onions, perhaps some medicinal herbs, you know." Elena smiled, imagining the space transformed, green and alive. "And there," Diego continued, pointing to another sector, "we could plant fruit trees for our children, for the future." The mention of children made Elena feel a warmth expanding in her chest, a family, a legacy, a continuation of what their fathers had begun, but in their own way, with their own rules. "I like that plan," she said, leaning against Diego's shoulder, "one step at a time." They returned to town when the sun began to set, casting elongated shadows on the path. People greeted them as they passed, with a respect and affection that Elena had never experienced before. She was no longer the foreigner, the stranger who had appeared claiming a promise. She was one of them, part of the community. That night, in her small room above the store, Elena wrote in her diary, a habit she had adopted since her father's death. She described the house, the rings, the plans for the garden, but above all she wrote about the feeling of belonging, of having finally found her place in the world. Upon closing the diary, Her eyes fell on the medallion she always carried with her, now resting on the table. She opened it, observing the lock of her father's hair and the date that had marked the beginning of everything. "We did it, Dad," she murmured in the dimness, "in a way that perhaps you didn't imagine. But we did it." Winter came with its white mantle, transforming the landscape into a silent and pure expanse. Repairs on the main house of the ranch progressed slowly, hindered by the weather but never stopped. Elena and Diego had decided to move there as soon as the roof was completely repaired and the windows replaced. Judge Henderson had finally issued his verdict. The ranch legally belonged to Diego as the legitimate heir of Ricardo Montero. The falsified deeds by Quintero had been annulled, and an arrest warrant had been issued against him for fraud and possible implication in the deaths of both fathers, although the man remained missing. One January morning, while snow fell softly outside, Elena and Widow Ramirez arranged boxes of memories in the living room of the ranch house. They had found old photographs, letters, personal objects that told the story of generations. "Your mother was a beautiful woman," commented the widow, showing Elena a faded photograph of a young woman with dark hair and luminous eyes, "and very brave. Raising a son alone in these lands was not easy." Elena took the photograph, studying the face she barely remembered. Her mother had died when she was 8 years old, leaving a void that her father had tried to fill with stories and teachings. "Sometimes I wonder if she would be proud of me," Elena confessed, caressing the image with her fingers. "Of the decisions I've made." The widow smiled, with that tranquil wisdom that only years can give. "Mothers always know how to recognize the true happiness of their children," she replied. "And you, child, have found yours. That's the only thing that matters." They continued with their task, discovering forgotten treasures. Diego's first hat, the tools his father had used to build the house. Even an old storybook with marked pages and childish comments in the margins. Diego entered at that moment, shaking the snow off his boots. His face shone with a mixture of cold and enthusiasm. "I found something," he announced, taking a small object from his pocket. It was buried near the old stable. It was an antique key of forged iron with an elaborate design on the handle. "It belonged to my grandfather," he explained. "He used it for a small chest, where he kept his most precious objects. I thought it had been lost forever." Widow Ramirez looked at him with an enigmatic expression. "They say the earth returns what is entrusted to it when the time is right," she commented, returning to her task of arranging photographs. Diego approached Elena, showing her the key with a smile like a child who has found a treasure. "Is the chest also buried?" she asked, infected by his enthusiasm. "No," he replied. "It's in the attic. I found it weeks ago. But without the key, well, I didn't want to force it." They went up together to the attic, a cold space where light entered through a small circular window. Among covered furniture and stacked boxes, Diego headed to a corner where a small wooden chest with rusted fittings rested. With slightly trembling hands, he inserted the key into the lock. It turned with difficulty, but finally yielded with a satisfying click. Upon opening the lid, a smell of time and memories escaped from the interior. Inside there were several objects. A pocket watch that had stopped, a package of letters tied with a worn ribbon, a woman's wedding ring, a lock of blonde hair, and at the bottom, an envelope sealed with wax. Diego took the envelope with reverence. On the front, in firm calligraphy, was written, "For my son when he finds his path." "It's my father's handwriting," Diego murmured, passing his fingers over the words as if he could feel the hand that had written them. Carefully, he broke the seal and extracted a folded letter. As he read, his expression went from curiosity to surprise, and finally to a mixture of sadness and understanding. "My father knew that Quintero would try to take the ranch from him," he finally said, passing the letter to Elena. "He suspected about the gold, about his intentions. That's why he hid the original deed in this chest." Elena read the letter, feeling a chill as she encountered the words of a man who had anticipated his own death. "My son, if you are reading this, it is because my fears have been confirmed. Quintero is dangerous, ambitious beyond reason. Protect our land, not for the gold it may contain, but because it is our legacy, our history. And remember your promise to Carlos Rojas's daughter. It is not a burden, but a gift. He once saved my life, and I promised him that our families would always be united. Find Elena. She has the answers I cannot give you. He always knew you would come, said Diego, looking at her with amazement. Somehow he always knew we would find each other. Elena felt tears filling her eyes. All the road traveled, all the tests faced, all the fears overcome. Everything had been part of a plan larger than themselves. Our fathers planted the seeds, she said, intertwining her fingers with Diego's. But it is we who have cultivated what has grown. They came down from the attic with the chest and its treasures, ready to incorporate them into their new life, into their new shared history. Outside, the snow had ceased, and a timid ray of sun filtered through the clouds like a promise of brighter days. That afternoon, while Widow Ramirez returned to town with Diego, Elena remained alone in the house. She walked through the rooms, touching the walls, the doors, feeling the history they contained. This house, this land had witnessed so much. Love, loss, betrayal, redemption, and now it would witness their future. She stopped in front of a window, observing the snowy landscape. In spring, they would plant the garden they had planned. In summer, perhaps the house would be full of laughter and new life. In autumn, they would gather the fruits of their labor. And in winter, they would sit by the fire, telling stories of those who came before, preparing the way for those who would come after. The circle was complete. The promise was fulfilled, not as an obligation, but as a free and loving choice. Elena brought her hand to her belly, where for a few weeks she suspected a new life was growing, a secret she would share with Diego that very night when he returned. The land slowly awakened under the snow, preparing to be reborn, and with it, hope was reborn. Love, the continuity of what their fathers had dreamed, but that they would make reality in their own way. Spring arrived with an explosion of color and life. The fields around the Montero ranch were covered with wildflowers, and the air filled with the buzzing of bees and the singing of birds returning from their winter migration. Elena and Diego had definitely settled in the main house, now transformed into a cozy home thanks to months of dedicated work. The walls had been repainted, the floors polished, the windows replaced. But more important than the physical changes was the atmosphere, a mixture of respect for the past and hope in the future. That April morning, Elena woke up with the first rays of the sun. Diego had already gotten up, as always. From her window, she could see him in the newly planted garden, kneeling between carefully traced furrows. Her belly, now visibly rounded under her nightgown, moved slightly with a kick from the baby growing inside her. "Good morning to you too, little one," she murmured, caressing the curve of her abdomen. "Soon you will know this world, this land that will be yours someday." She dressed slowly, choosing a wide dress that accommodated her new figure. While braiding her hair in front of the mirror, her eyes fell on the medallion she had always carried with her, now resting on the dressing table. She no longer needed it as before. The memories of her father were alive in other places, in the medicinal plants she had begun to cultivate, in the books she had brought with her, in the stories she would tell her son. She went down to the kitchen where she prepared a pot of herbal tea. Through the open window came the fresh morning breeze, bringing with it the aroma of damp earth and new flowers. Elena breathed deeply, savoring the sensation of peace that had taken so long to find. With the cup of tea in her hand, she went out to the porch and then walked towards the garden where Diego was working. He looked up as he felt her approach, and his face lit up with a smile that still made Elena's heart beat faster. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he greeted her, standing up to kiss her softly. "How are my two loves this morning?" "Restless," she replied, smiling as she took Diego's hand and placed it on her belly, just in time to feel another kick. "I think someone wants to come out and meet the world." Diego then knelt, resting his cheek against Elena's abdomen. "Patience, little one," he murmured. "Everything is ready to receive you." And it was true. The room that would be the baby's was prepared, with a crib that Diego had built with his own hands, blankets knitted by the women of the town, toys carved in wood by some of the elders. The child would be born into a community that already awaited him with love. Elena ran her fingers through Diego's hair, feeling a wave of tenderness. This man, who had begun as a stranger linked to her by an ancient promise, had become the center of her world, her companion, her friend, her lover, her family. "Come," said Diego, standing up and taking her hand. "I want to show you something." He guided her to the edge of the garden, where he had been working that morning. There, in a carefully prepared circular space, he had planted a small tree. An apple tree, he explained. They say they take years to bear fruit, but when they do, they feed generations. Elena immediately understood the symbolism. It wasn't just a tree. It was a declaration of faith in the future, in continuity, in the life that would continue long after they were gone. It's perfect, she said, squeezing Diego's hand. A living legacy. They sat together on a bench that Diego had placed under an old oak, observing the landscape that was now unequivocally theirs, not just by legal documents, but by the work of their hands, by the decisions of their hearts. Sometimes I wonder, Elena said after a moment of shared silence, if our fathers knew what they were really doing when they signed that agreement, if they could imagine that we would end up like this. Diego reflected for a moment, with his gaze lost on the horizon. I think they planted a seed without knowing exactly what tree would grow, he finally replied, but they trusted it would be something good, something strong. Elena nodded, thinking about the turns her life had taken since that day in the town square, when she had claimed a stranger as her fiancé. I came seeking to fulfill a promise, she said quietly, and I found much more than that. I found a home. Diego surrounded her shoulders with an arm, bringing her closer to him. And I, who never wanted to be bound by others' promises, discovered that sometimes the paths others trace for us can lead us exactly where we need to be. A light wind moved the oak leaves above them, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. In the distance, the town looked small and peaceful, with columns of smoke rising from the chimneys. This was their world now, a world they had built together, stone by stone, decision by decision, day by day. Elena closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of the earth, the murmur of the nearby stream, the whisper of the leaves, the singing of the birds. And beneath it all, almost imperceptible, but undeniably present, the constant beating of something deeper, older, the earth itself alive and breathing, keeping its secrets, holding its promises. Do you know what I thought the first time I saw you? Diego asked, breaking the silence. Elena opened her eyes, curious. That this woman is completely crazy, she joked. Diego laughed, a sound that Elena treasured every time she heard it. Besides that, he replied, I thought, her eyes have seen too much for someone so young, and I want to know what they have seen. Elena turned to look at him, moved by the confession. And now? She asked. What do you think now? Diego caressed her cheek with infinite tenderness. That I want to see everything that remains to be seen, but through your eyes, he replied. Each dawn, each season, each moment, with you. The words floated between them, simple but loaded with meaning. It wasn't a grandiloquent promise, nor a solemn oath. It was something deeper, the quiet declaration of a man who had found his place in the world, next to the woman he loved. Elena felt the baby move again, as if responding to his father's words. A new generation that would be born not from an ancient promise, but from the love that had flourished from it. They got up when the sun was high, returning slowly towards the house. On the way, Elena stopped to collect some wild herbs that she would use in dinner. Her fingers, which once had known only the pages of forbidden books, now recognized plants by their touch, by their aroma. My mother would be proud, she commented, storing the herbs in her pocket. She always wanted me to learn the language of plants. And my father would be proud to see the ranch alive again, Diego replied, to see that his fight was not in vain. In the house, while Elena prepared the food and Diego repaired a chair, the everyday normality seemed a miracle in itself. Each simple task, each shared moment, was a testimony of what they had built together. That night, when the full moon illuminated the ranch with its silver light, Elena went out to the porch. She couldn't sleep, restless from the baby's movements, and from thoughts that spun in her mind like leaves in the wind. She looked towards the garden, where the small apple tree stood against the starry sky, so fragile now, but with the promise of strength, of permanence. Like us, she murmured to herself, like all of us. She felt Diego before hearing him, his warm presence at her back, his arms surrounding her, his chin resting gently on her shoulder. Can't sleep? He asked in a low voice. I was thinking, she replied, leaning against his chest, about everything that has happened, about everything that will come. Diego embraced her more tightly, his hands finding rest on the place where their child grew. "Whatever comes," he said, "we will face it together." And under the moonlight, with the solid earth beneath their feet and the infinite sky above their heads, Elena knew it was true. They had overcome forced promises, buried secrets, threats, losses, and fears. They had transformed an obligation into a choice, a duty into love. The wind whispered among the leaves of the old oak, like ancient voices approving their path. And Elena, for the first time in her life, felt completely at peace, because in the end the true promise wasn't the one their fathers had signed on a yellowed paper, but the one she and Diego renewed each day with their actions, with their words, with their shared love. A promise that now, under the vast expanse of the night sky, extended towards the future like the horizon itself, infinite, luminous, and full of possibilities.